You know that he's a coder when he's putting up Linux.
Yay. Linux is amazing. Linux is great. Right. So I'm just going to quickly show you the deployment part because it's the easiest one.
Can you read this well, or should we make it a little darker?
A bit darker.
A bit darker, yeah.
So the deployment part is it's not something we will write ourselves. The code exists. There is link to it. But I'll just show you that there is the whole thing that we just presented that works on my machine. And then I'll show you that you can also connect to it from your phones or your machines. So we have this code right here, which I am not sure you can see it pretty well. But I can also. Right. So first, we have some imports. Imports are just a way to get information from pre-implemented code in Python. We will be doing that all the time whenever we write new code. Here we have a way to create a variable, create a class, and put that class into the variable. It's just a way to set up Flask as a system that I use to deploy. And then here is what we just talked about in the presentation. We create the route. We create a function that this route's used to call, and then we estimate or create what the return function is. It's pretty simple. All of it is stuff that are like this. We have the JSON placeholder. This is exactly the code that I just showed you. And we're going to go a bit more details in depth into code. So if I come here, let's ignore this QR code for a minute. I have the same code, and when I run it, it's going to show me the 127.0.0.1 500, and yeah, and then it shows hello world. Now, if you wanted to test this code for yourself, you wouldn't be able to. So the way we want to do that is that I'll be using Pingy, which I just also linked it for you in the presentation. And whenever you start, it tells you like what you want to call, and then you give it the local port. For example, 500 is default. I am using 3000. So we'll say 3000, copy the link it gives you, go back to my terminal, and it's as easy as that. Now, if you scan this QR code, it will go to the website that already has the API set up for you. There's going to be like a security risk button. Click yes, I'm not hacking you, I hope.
That's what all hackers say.
Yeah, so you can see that there's a lot of failed requests already. This is, I think, where you need to click the button. So yeah, does everyone see the hello world stuff? No? Say that again? It page isn't working. Let's see. Probably too many people logged in at once. Well, this would be the easiest way to get everyone to go there. You can see that it does show you that people are trying to access it. This is a way for you to log all information. Or if I had the pro version, which I don't, you'll be seeing the server. But this already shows that you can access my API call, and it's showing you an error from my side. This is server error, right? So this is just a quick interlude into deployment.
But maybe let's go one step back. What are the things that you're having? Can you open your editor first?
Yes.
So basically, we're already working with a number of different files. So what he first did is basically create a text file, which he named deploy.py. PI basically tells the system it's a Python file. Everything until line 6 is a standard thing that just this Flask framework always has to do. So if you want to build something like this, you just copy paste lines 1 to 6, and then from line 7 is the code that you basically built yourself. You could have built every other app on this as well. So that being saved now is nothing else but just a file of commands for the system to work with. Then you went into the terminal, right? So also tell me when I'm explaining something wrong.
So basically, this is all the information, and then at the end, again, these lines here are very standard. They will always be there, and then everything in the middle is what you create yourself, right? Once you're happy with that, you go into your terminal, or you can click the run button, but you know, techie's got a techie. And then you do the command. Now, ideally in Python, what you would do is you say Python. For me, it's Python 3 because Linux. Amazing. And then you say the name of the file, which is deploy.py.
Of course, you have to be in the folder where the file is.
Yes.
This is something that is a little bit scary at the beginning. And you can either do that, so he's using the VS Code. If you're using a Unix machine like Mac, for example, you have a terminal that can also do that. If you have a Windows machine, I can't help you because I have no idea.
It has a command prompt and it works properly as well. Like the CMD is just the terminal that works. There is now also the Linux subsystem for Windows. Amazing choice.
Amazing.
And you just run it. And this could work for any Python code that you have. Now, of course, there are different ways. For example, if you're running a Streamlit app, Streamlit is a front-end framework for Python. It requires you to say Streamlit run python.whatever or something.py. But it's just different ways to do the same things. And it depends on the documentation of the file you'll be using. Now, this is great if you want to have something on your own.
And also, this is now doing the magic, because with Python 3 is basically the program you tell to execute something, the python.py, and it's not only deploying, or it's not only trying to execute all the codes in the 31 lines, but the big magic thing is the import Flask, where it imports Flask, which in turn creates an entire server on his machine. So it only because of this import Flask are we able to go on the local host then and basically use the laptop as the server, technically very, very similar to what a web server would do, to access this. And then basically you use Piggy, right? Yeah. What Piggy does is basically create a connection from this server to their server, and their server is publicly available, so you can go to their server and it will try to ping this server, and apparently for some reason on probably Piggy's side there was this error. So also just with the 31 lines of code and the one step of deploy Python 3 deploy, there was so much happening already in the back end. We did not have to care about, because we were using modules which are not APIs, but similar concept.
Yeah, exactly. It's like frameworks and modules are what APIs are to your code base, right? It's code implemented by someone else that you can run without doing anything, so it's amazing. So this is already great if you want to run something on your own machine, if your machine can handle it. If you want to do something a bit more complex, we're going to do what we're doing in a minute. We're going to go to what is Google Colab. Now, Google Colab is a server hosted by Google that allows us to run Python code with a GPU. And it's basically great because everything happens on the cloud, so even if your machine is too weak, it will still run everything. And this is what we will be doing for the rest of the hands-on exercises. So before we move on from this code and this deployment, does anyone have any questions? Great. So this code, like I said, is available. At the end of the notebooks, there is a link to multiple GitHub repositories. One is the ones we'll be using for today. And then one is for the GitHub repository we use for the other 2 iterations, and all the code is there. So you'll have a lot of examples to look at. But yeah, without any further ado, let me cancel all my code. And everyone has a link to the GitHub notebook already, right?
Not yet.
Not yet.
No, I think it's in the slides.
It's in the slide, but I can create a QR code for everyone.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Because I'm not the, yeah, I can just give you the, wait for it. Yeah, please everyone, get this link and then get it on your laptop somehow. What I do is just send it to myself on WhatsApp and I can get it there. So it gives you a link once you scan it, and you want to give that link to your laptop because then it will open the notebook you'll be writing code in. You can also, in theory, keep it in your phone. However, what I edit, you will not be able to see it, so you'll have to look at the edits yourselves.
It says that the scanned code is a preview. This is not the final access to our. What?
General.
Can we send them the links on there? Do you have like their Slack or emails maybe?
I'll send you the link.
Do we have like a way to send everyone an email or a message maybe?
Yeah, I actually think it's in the slides.
Yeah, it's all the links are in the slides already.
While we're waiting, can you explain about the PD, the role and how you use the PD besides
The Piggy. Yeah, so here's the thing. When you deploy your own website, right, you create this 127.0.0.1 and you add a port that is a listener. Basically, anyone that goes on this internet connection and goes there will be able to find it, and all information will be routed to me. Now, if you're on a different connection, you cannot access my home localhost, right? So what Piggy does, Piggy creates an IP address or a website that is public. You can access it from anywhere. And then I locally create a tunnel. Basically, you can think of it as an API that asks Piggy every like 5 seconds, is there any new requests? And if Piggy has something, it'll be like, yeah, here, there is a request that came for you. And then I process it, send it back to Piggy that sends it back to you.
Is it what they call hosting?
Yes, it's very test deployed hosting. So it's free version of hosting. This is why, for example, like not many people are here, but when everyone tried to access, it just broke down. But if like, let's say you want to test something in front of 2-3 people, it will work. It actually gives you a link that works for 1 hour, and after the hour is done, it breaks.
Free hosting?
Yeah, it's just free hosting. Now, Ngrok is a bit more better than that. Ngrok is what a lot of people use to host their own servers at home. So a lot of the people who work in IT security, who are a bit security freaks, will create their own servers that does all of their web searches. This is why they will have ad blocking from within their own home system. And they use Ngrok to set that up. So it's a bit better, but it's also still free. Now, the paid version of these might be better, but usually if you're hosting, you want a server that is also able to give you more. So for example, if you're using Heroku, like a deployment server, they give you a bunch of GPUs and more memory that the website will keep running. You can also think about how do you scale it, so whatever hosting service you use can also create multiple copies and balance the load across all of them so that if one breaks, the other one still works, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I just sent you through the Luma link that you signed up with, the link to this Colab. So let me know if that worked. So you probably also already have it on your computer then. Except for one person, I'm just reminding because you're working on my computer.
But then you have my links from Slack, right?
He doesn't.
Yeah.
Let's see if this helps somehow. And just to maybe to also have something to say about Colab, why are we using Colab and not the editor itself?
Right, so like we said, Colab has access to GPUs and services. It's also on the cloud. And basically, the nice thing about it is that we don't need to configure any environment systems for Python. And we're going to have to install a bunch of stuff. And it's way always nicer for people to install it on a different machine where they don't have to worry about it. So the great thing about Colab is that you can install stuff, you can delete files, create files. And once you close it, it just resets, basically. And the best feature about it is just the GPU. So if you're training your own AI, if you're creating your own AI, it's out there for you in case your machine is just too weak to handle it.
Yeah. Another advantage I think in this setup is if we use it on our own computers, there will at least be 50% for whom it doesn't work because we forgot to install some packages.
I think one big thing on the techie side of things is someone tells you your code doesn't work and you're always like, it works on my machine. If you're ever in a tech department, this is how you respond.
Yeah. So is it working for you? Can you access the Colab? Wonderful.
Okay, is anyone still not on the Colab? Great. Yeah, so I will be walking through it very slowly. If you think I'm very slow or very fast, let me know, it's fine. The goal is to get you to understand everything here. But just to give you an overview of what we'll be seeing, we'll be talking about APIs. Some of them we talked about. And the idea is, how do you write code to call an API? Now, we will also be going through some documentation of that API and trying to see how we can connect to it. And the idea is to give you a notion of how you can replace that API with whatever API you want to put. And then we're going to talk about something called web scraping. We didn't really talk about it in slides, but web scraping in Siri is an API because you make a request to get the website, and then you use some tool, some framework that gives you whatever text you want, and then you do something with it. And finally, well, we did talk about AI tools, so we're going to use the GPT OpenAI API to do everything we need. Yeah. With that out of the way, this is all of the text that you can read at home just to walk you through the tutorial. But we want to step by the first block. Now, you'll see that the first step is always to install a bunch of stuff. However, for requests, it's actually already installed. It comes with your Python package already. So we just need to import it into our code base. Now, when you import code, think of it as all of the code within that function, within that class, just on top of your code. So it runs before your code does. So to run it, you can click on the run, or you can do Shift-Enter. Trust it. I wouldn't hack you. And then it will take some time to connect to the GPU and all resources, and then it will work.
Maybe a quick insert if you've never worked with Colab, because this was confusing me when I first worked with it. Colab has the nice feature, like every notebook, that it combines text that you can write with Markdown, so basically just normal text to read, and code. And code is always indented like this, and also with this play button on the right. So the things we are executing is, of course, the code, and the code is always in Python, and the text is just the explanation. So at the moment, listen to Mostafa and worry about the code. If you look at it at home, also read the text beneath that.
Yeah. So ideally, when we looked at the Visual Studio Code, everything was in one file, and we ran the entire file. The nice thing as well about Colab is that you can run certain blocks on their own. So for example, if I want to just import, or if I want to test a certain part of my code without running the entire thing, I can run it. And Colab does this thing for you, well, every Jupyter Notebook, but Colab is a Jupyter Notebook. It does this thing where it saves information for you. So if I do something like x is equal to something in one block, and then use x in a different block, it will know what x is. And this is like a nice way for you to... Yeah.
What is the difference to Jupyter Notebook?
So Colab is a Jupyter Notebook. So Jupyter is just like the apps that you will download on your thing, like on your machine. But a notebook is what we see here. So it's a way to implement markdowns and code blocks. Right, yeah. And then you can test just a small portion of your code based on stuff you already ran. And this is a nice way to debug without running all of your data. So for example, sometimes the data loading takes 30 minutes or something if you're working with big data or more. And you would want to, once you loaded the data, you want to test a certain part of your code without running the data loading every single time. So Colab is nice for this. However, because it keeps everything in memory, sometimes it crashes if you have so much stuff in memory because everything is saved. But yeah, not important for now. So for the next part, we want to talk about API requests, and this is where we talk about HTTP requests. Now, every time you send something over the internet, it's used HTTP or HTTPS for security. And this is where you send something over the internet and get a response back. This is where you Google something, and this is what we will be using as an idea. So if we scroll a bit down, we will see that I added some explanations to what HTTP requests are. Now you will see that there are 4 main types. There is the get, post, put, and delete. Now get is when you're trying to get something off the internet. You're not doing something with it on the server side, you're just reading it. This could be something like you're reading text from Wikipedia. Or most of what we're doing today is get requests, so you're getting information. Post request is when you're posting information. This is where you put something on the server, but it's also used usually when you're logging in or creating a new account. It's creating a new document, let's say. And then put is usually used for updates. So if there's something already that exists on the servers that I want to update, and delete as well, deletion. Now this, as well as the code that you get, the response codes, if you're creating the API, it's kind of up to you. If you want to be like an anarchist and you want to implement chaos, you can have a system that uses delete to create and returns 500 when it's successful, if you really want to mess with your developers. But like I said, these are just standards that you can use whenever you're creating something to make it easier for other developers to use your system.
And probably the most common that you will use is get, followed by post. Probably this is already the order of what the relevancy of those requests.
So in series, these are only relevant if you're interacting with your own back-end database. And because if you're creating users, deleting users, updating their emails, and so on and so forth, then you'll be using those. But if you're using an API, in most cases, it's just a GET request. Here, I talked about the response format. So in most cases, we're going to be seeing a JSON response. JSON response is squiggly parentheses that has the key and values. There's also XML, and there's HTML, what we will see if we're doing web scraping. Nice. So here is the easiest API calls of them all, is something called the JSON placeholder. Now, JSON placeholders is something that is created already. It's a public URL. You can access it from your web page, which means I can copy this entire line. Wait for it. And paste it here, and we will see the result. Now, you can also do that for yourself, but you'll see that it's a bit formatted for us nicely. So we have a user ID, we have another ID, and these are just a way to simulate how it feels like to get data from an API. Now, why you would have user ID and an idea? Because sometimes you would have a database that has an ID that the database creates for you, and then you have an ID that you want to create yourself for the users. And now we want to get that through code, which is the important part. So the first thing is, you will see that I created a variable just to hold the string for me. And I can, in theory, just take this whole string and put it in the function I need to, but it's way nicer and more readable for people if you create it beforehand. And then this is the magic line, the request.get. Now, this is basically requests, is the package that we just imported. It's a package that comes with Python, and it allows us to do HTTP requests. .get is the request type that we just talked about. So there is request.get, .post, delete, or put, and then the URL or endpoint. And this returns the entire response that we need from that request into this variable. And then we can do stuff with it. Say that again? But in most cases, it's 200. Like 200, 201, 202, 203 are the possible codes for success. But like I said, the entire spectrum from 200 to 291 are successes. But standardized across all APIs is just 200. So this is why you'll see in my code, I'm only checking if it's 200. Of course, this can differ from a documentation to documentation, which is why you should always read the docs. However, here you'll see that in this line, I'm trying to get the response code. So response is the variable we just got from the request. And the status code is the status code. And dot here is a way for Python to say, hey, I have an object, and this object contains a variable, and I want to get that variable out. It's just syntax.
What would the request get contain the object? It would have the status code, it would have the content
body
of the JSON. What else would it have?
So what we can do as well is look at the documentation. But usually if you try to print it, the only thing you really import, like the things that are important are the response code and the data. Now the data has everything that you get from the HTML. The HTML has a body, it has a JSON format, it has like XML, and you can change it to whatever format that you want usually. But in theory, what you are going to be using is the JSON format if the API returns a JSON for you, and this again differs from one documentation to another. So for example, in our deployed code, we return the string, right? We return just hello world, and if I try to say .json, it will break. But if I say .data, it will return the string.
And the requests is kind of the web browser for the Python code. So you could put in Wikipedia and it would
Yes,
return.
exactly. You can say google.com and it will return something for you.
Yeah.
And we will see that in 2 blocks. Right, and then here I check if the response code is 200. This is to say, hey, is this successful? Did it work? If it did, then I want to say the response, again, the values that I just got, turn it to JSON for me, and I want to print it. Or I just want to say, hey, this failed, this is the response code, do something about it. And if we run this, we will see that we get the same output that we just saw on the browser. Is this clear for everyone? Is the Python syntax annoying for anyone? OK. So now we used an API that is created just to make you learn how to make your Hello World API application. We want to go, yeah, no worries. Like I said, it depends because the developer can decide that, let's say, for example, I want to create a system that will take your input and classify it into certain sets of information. Let's say I'm doing sentiment analysis. And based on the sentiment, I want to return different outputs. So I would say, well, 200 means happy sentiment. 201 will say bad sentiment, whatever, and then neutral sentiment. So this is a way for me to utilize all of them. But then again, it is just useful and way more easier for my developers that are using my service to say, here's 200, here's all the information you need in the JSON object. Like I said, it exists. Like whoever created the idea, whoever came up with the interface said it would be nice to have more options, but standardized. You don't want your developers to be like, if it's 200, do this. If it's 201, do this. But then again, you could need to. It just depends on the service you're using. But in most services we're using today, and most services that I interacted with, they only use 200. Like I just said it for completion, but in most cases you will not use it.
So you could use it if you wanted.
Yeah, like I said, if you really wanted to, you can create a server that returns 400 on correct requests. Like your code will not say no to it, but everyone using your service will just not be able to work with it, right?
So also, in other words, when HTTP was basically specified, the people who did the specification just said, okay, let's give the true answer, or let's give the right responses just 100 types. Let's give the wrong answers 100 types, and they did this to have enough space, and they did not so much foresee that almost every developer just uses 200 or 201 to either say, okay, everything worked, and that the faulty codes are basically just 400, 403, 404, and maybe 2 or 3 others. So most of these codes in the 200 space, in the 400 space, and in the 500 space are not used, but they are just reserved, more or less.
Like it's more frequent in the 400s, right? Because 404 is unknown, 403 is something else that I can't remember, and it's errors that tells you exactly what the problem is. However, you as a developer can decide to return 400 and then the string to explain what the error is. However, it's way easier for your developers to not have to create a string parser, but only look at the number, right? However, for a successful thing, you just say it's successful, and then I, as a developer, expect what I expected to get from the API call. So a successful thing is like, I expected something and I got it. An error is unexpected, so I have to know what exactly the error is, so I need more specification.
Which is also a developer thing, that you just talk about the things that do not work, and when it works, you just don't care.
Yeah, if it works, don't touch it is like the thing for every developer. Yeah. Any more questions? Okay. So now we're going to go into a public API. This is a public API that requires an API key. Now, API keys are what we talked about when we said if you're deploying your own service, you want people to pay for it. However, we're using free ones, of course, but they do come with limitations. Like they give you a set number of calls, and then once you finish them, you're going to have to pay. Now, before we dive into the information on how to call it, let's actually get the keys, shall we? So if you click on the link, Control-click it, it will open in a different thing, and we will get this web page. Accept all cookies. And you're going to need to sign up. I'm, of course, going to use a temporary email because I'm a techie.
If you have a MacBook, you can do that automatically.
Well, you can use your own emails, it's fine. We can close this. We can enter our emails, continue. It will send you a validation code. Eventually.
But they also have a nice service. I signed up with them last year. They've never sent me any spam or anything.
Yeah. They will send you a verification code. You can take it, paste it in your here, continue, asks you for a password. Agree. And then you can say anything here. I usually say learning about APIs. Apparently, no. They don't like my temporary email. Nothing works today as expected anymore. But hopefully if you use your email, it will work for you. I can go back and actually use my actual email, I guess. It's fine. Everything is always as expected.
That's the joy of front-end engineering, by the way, that
Yeah.
technically it's working, it's just unusable.
No? Yes? Yay. Okay. Just let me know when you get to the point where you have an account already. If it works on the first try, something is wrong.
Yeah. It's usually a sign that it didn't execute at all.
Yeah. If you run something and it works, something is wrong somewhere. You just don't see it yet.
So who has already an account? All right, still working on it.
At some point, it will send you like a verification email as well to click the link to log in. Just always check your email, check your spam if it's not there. Okay, anyone already inside? Okay. Okay, if you're already inside, you can navigate to the account. It will be on the top. And then you will see something called the key, and just copy that one. Do not change it, just copy it. Anyone still trying to get in? Okay, so everyone has an API key now.
All right.
Great. Right, so once we copied the API key, we can go back, scroll a bit down, And you'll find here two variables that I've created for you. One is the OMDB. We'll create that one in a second. And the other one is the weather API key. Now paste the weather API keys that we just got here, where it says your API key. And let's get the OMDB API key as well just very quickly, just so we can move on with the rest of it without having to go back up. So we're going to scroll up, go to the OMDB API, click, and we're going to just repeat the process. API key, we're going to say free, and we're just going to create one. See if my temporary email works this time.
I tried to create the temporary email. You paste the API key in the parentheses, so that Python understands this is a string, so it's a string of text that you put in, or string of items you put in. If you forget to put the parentheses left and right, then it will suppose that you're working with a variable, which of course you did not set, and it will create an error. So this is a very small bit of syntax you have to understand, that you don't make a mistake that I very often do.
The OMDB API is pretty straightforward. You just write the email, a name, and it will send it to you by email. The email says, here is your API key. You copy that one, but then you need to remember to verify. So there's a click the following link to activate. Remember to click that one because we forgot last time. And then it will say your key is activated. Okay. Anyone still getting any of the API keys? So everyone has one. Great. So now that we copied it, we're going to go back to our notebook. And once you add the API keys, make sure that you put them in the correct spot, otherwise there will be errors. And make sure to run this cell by Control-Enter or Shift-Enter. And now we have the API keys that we can use in the other side of the application. Now, I had already written down how to work with it. However, what I want to show you now is that we need to learn, like we can learn a lot about the API by looking at the documentation. Now, the Visual Crossing, the Weather API, is one of the nicest out there because it gives you what is called the query builder. But we can click on that, and then it says click a location. So for example, you can say Munich, and it will calculate it for you, and then there should be a button to get it. No? Yes? No? Well, API docs. Yeah. So here is basically what you will be doing for any API, whether it's one you created yourself, whether it's a public one, or it just exists for any reason. You're going to go into the docs way, the documentation of that API, and you're going to try to learn how to use it. Here it tells you that the request type looks like this. So you have the endpoint, which is visualcrossing.com / this web service / REST API / services, timeline, and then a bunch of stuff in square brackets. Now, this is where you want to add some variables. Now, for example, location, date 1, date 2. Location is already known. We already know what location is. The question is, what is date 1 and date 2, right? And if we go down, it says that location is required. However, date 1 is optional, and date 2 is also optional. And then this tells you that date 1 is the start date, and date 2 is the end date. So basically, if you want the weather on a range of dates. So now knowing this, we can copy all of that. And we can go back to our notebook where it says the API URL. You can paste everything we just copied inside these parentheses and remove any extra spaces you might have.
for the ones who see Python code for the first time, you see we sometimes use one parenthesis and sometimes the double. Exactly the same thing.
Yeah, in Python, it doesn't matter if you're using Java or another language, it does. But Python just handles every string as its own thing. So single quotations, double quotations doesn't matter. In Java and C, it's like character and string. So every string is a list of characters, and characters are denoted specifically by single quotes. But in Python, they're both the same things, and they're usually a way for you to create a string that has a single quotation inside, or a string that has a double quotation inside.
So when you see Mustafa's code that he sometimes uses the double quotations and sometimes the single quotation, it's a strong sign that he copied one of these two code blocks.
Okay, so everyone copied the string and pasted it here, right? Now we want to edit it, right? We want to change it a bit. Now, because date 1 and date 2 are optional, I'm going to delete them. So you can see from where the square brackets start all the way to where the square brackets end, and also the slash. We're going to delete all of that and just keep the square bracket with location. And then we have your API key. Now we already know what the API key is, and we want to put that into the string. Now you have two ways of doing that. You can write it down, or we're going to go right behind the quotations here and add an F. This is a way to add a formatted string, which allows us to add variables inside the string. So the variable is calculated for us and then parsed into the string. A lot of jargon in tech, but it's just a way for us to add the variable rather than add the value. So for example, I'm going to go to your API key. I'll remove that, so it will say equal. I will open parentheses / squiggly ones, and I will add the weather API key. Make sure you write it correctly, because otherwise it will break. And then we will see that I have a location created for you and a location here. We will remove all the location with the square brackets, and again add location. And then, assuming I didn't do anything wrong in my code, it should run when we do this. And it runs. Nice. Does it also run for all of you? So you'll see that I added an F right behind the string, and then I removed date 1 and date 2. I replaced the square brackets of location with squiggly brackets of location, which is already created for you right here. And then we replaced the your API key string with the squiggly brackets of weather API key. What is the actual name of the squiggly brackets?
I don't know.
Just not in my brain anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, does this work for everyone? The rest of the code is exactly what we had before, is the request.get, checking, and then getting the JSON file and printing it. Do we have any errors? No? So it runs for everyone.
And does it make sense for you what we did there? Question?
The code is running. Creating the JSON file means like what it exactly means. Because if it is a response dot status code is 200 means it's successful. So if it is successful, it's getting a JSON file means it's getting the file responsible to access the API. Or
Yes. So for example, in this API, we know that we get the query cost, the latitude, longitude, which is the information here, right? Now this is already explained what you get, the return that you get from the documentation. Now status code 200 means that if you try to access this JSON file to get something that we tell you is there, it's there.
so this JSON file is gateway, so we're accessing the JSON file.
Yeah, so it tells you that the request you made was parsed correctly. What you asked for, you got. But it could also be that what you think you got, right? So successful 200 just means that the API, the endpoint you searched for, went to the API, got calculated, returned with no errors. So if you follow the documentation properly, then whatever you expect to get is what you get. But if you're a bit outdated and the request changed, It could be that the API came back correctly, so you get 200. But now let's say instead of longitude, latitude, it's in one variable. It's called longitude and latitude. So if you try to access only longitude, it will not work and you get an error. But it's status code 200. Do you know what I mean? So status code 200 only works on the HTTP request being sent and received. Any more questions? Great. So now we want to do this one more time, but I want to show you a different way that we can add parameters and variables within our endpoint. Now here we added the endpoint into our endpoint. We added the variables into our endpoint. However, sometimes you don't want to make it publicly available. Let's say you're sending some user information or a token based on a user, and you don't want the user to be able to access it from the URL. So you want to put it into a payload or within the body of the request. And this is what we will do in the next block. So here, you'll see that I created this params for us, which host all of the variables that we need. First, we need to get the API URL. So we're going to go to the OMDB API, click on the API and scroll down. There is the usage. And we will see that this is already the API request. Now, this is supposedly a poster API request. It should return the image, but when we tried it, it didn't work, so I think it's not updated. However, this is the one we'll be using. Now, you can already see that if you get that one, it puts the API key within your API, but we're going to change that. We're going to copy it, go back to our API, add that into our URL, delete any extra spaces, and I'm going to delete everything until the .com/. So we only need the endpoint as is. We just need to know which route to go to, which is the omdb-api.com. And if we scroll down a bit, we see a list of parameters. These are the parameters that we can use to get specific information. For example, we have T, which is the movie title. And then we have type for movie series and episodes, and so on and so forth. You can add either of these into your request. However, we're just going to be focusing on T as a title. So you see that I left it empty for you. So what you can do is search for your favorite title here. For example, I really like the movie Inception, and I write it wrong. Inception, no.
Let's take a movie with an easier title, right?
Yeah. Wait, I never wrote it before. Inception. Yes, yes, yes. I'm a coder, not a typer. And no one saw that. And everything else is almost the same, except for the get function that takes a parameter as a value, a params as a value. And then I can just pass my dictionary, which is a JSON object, exactly the same as the ones we keep receiving from the API. And running this one will give us the movie.
And this also shows two things that were in the question. For example, if you write a title completely wrong, then first of all, the server decides what it does with the misspelling, if it tries to correct the spelling, or if it's something that the server doesn't resolve, it can still return 200. So it can still say, okay, we went to the website and got a return, and still you don't get a return because the title was just so misspelled that it didn't get a real title, but the call still was successful. So maybe this is an addition to the why 200 and not just look for the result that I get, because here I might be getting a real result, it's just not useful for me.
Did everyone get a movie? Yeah.
The parameter on the web team is defined by the website.
So yeah, here you can see that the parameters, these are already decided, these are already implemented by the developers of the API, and they check for a value called T. So you have to give them something that is called T as well. Yeah. So it depends on the API you're using again. Sometimes it's not a variable, but it's also like just the location. So for example, here, there were no something equals. There was no L equals something. It was just the location. So it's just the API knows that the first parameter is always the location, the second parameter is always the date, and so on. And it just it depends on how they want to create it themselves. Okay. Did everyone get their movie title back?
A question about the request that we get. Like it's also a function that built from Python. So we're just using the other function, which is called like request get.
Yeah, so request is the package, and this is the class that holds all of the functions that do HTTP requests for us, right? And then we said that HTTP requests are get, put, post, and delete. So we choose get, which is the one we're using here because the website told us it's a GET request. And then we add the endpoint and any parameters that we want to add, which is the stuff that the function takes to calculate. Right. Now, what I wanted to do is, for this API, I wanted to show you that you can get more than just JSON objects, but you can also get more information. You can get images, for example. So this is the NASA API that we can use to get the picture of the day. So let's try to do that real quick. If it doesn't work, we can skip it because yesterday they did not send me an email at all, so we can try again. But if you click on the link, we can say generate API key, and then just create an account real quick. And we will get an API. That was pretty quick. Yeah, and then I will copy that API. Let me just check if we need to. Yeah, it says you can start using the API right away. So we'll paste it here. And just let me know when you already have an API. Do we already have an API key? Is anyone still getting on? OK. So this particular part of the code is almost the same. You'll see that I have a URL endpoint. I again added the API key as part of the URL. We got the response. We checked for 200. We got the data. And then this is where everything starts to differ for a bit. Now, before we just printed the data. But this is how we can get information out of it, right? So for example, there is part of the data that is called title, so we're able to extract it, and then there is something called URL that gives us the image. And then there's an explanation to whatever image we see. And then here, we're doing another URL request. This is another API call to go to the URL of the image. And then here, we're using a package called PIL. It's an image library that loads the bytes that we get. So we're not receiving a JSON object, but we're receiving bytes. And we're loading that into code. This is a lot of information that we're not going to be using for the rest of the day, but it's just like to show you something. And then this is a way for plotting. So this is a way to visualize the image that we're getting. And when we run this, we get the picture of the day. And we can see that the title is Kings of the Winds Who Do Under the Milky Way, and then there is an explanation for it. And again, this is to show you that API calls are not just to get a bunch of text that we will not be using. However, you can pass this information to GPT, for example, for whatever reason you need, right? So it's just a cool way to know that there are multiple different APIs that return different things, and there are a lot more you can do with it. Now, finally, we can go into web scraping. Now, you'll see that the code for web scraping is almost the same, right? You have a URL, you have request.get, you check for 200, and then you do stuff. Now, web scraping is, like I said, is an API call on its own. You find the website, you go there, you do an HTTP request, you receive the HTML response, which has all of the information. Now, for the API calls that we were using, the endpoint URL was pointing at something that only returns the result you're interested in. So, for example, it only returns the JSON object, so you can just say the JSON and it works. However, when you go to a website that is publicly available, like Wikipedia or Postman or whatever, there is a website for you there, so it has a lot of information. So what you need to do is to transform that information into HTML and then use a package that understands that HTML for you. There are multiple ones out there. We are using Beautiful Soup, which is a great name, and it does all of that specifically for us. Now, you can add any link here. However, be very careful because not every website allows you to scrape. So, for example, if you try to go to Twitter, it will not work. If you try to go to LinkedIn, it will also not work. So most of the websites that have a paid API will not allow you to do web scraping. And there are ways to stop your website from allowing that. But we're not going to dive deep into it. So what I am using and what we're going to be using for the rest, like for the Capstone project, is a Wikipedia link. But you can also experiment with anything else to see what you get. So I already added the link for you in the comments here. So we can copy that one.
Because the question came up yesterday also when Benedict and Christoph were talking, web scraping per se is a very legal thing. So every computer is allowed to visit every computer's website. However, as you said, some web services prevent that. And if you're building a commercial web crawler, then we've also learned that there's this robots.txt on every website that explicitly says who is allowed to crawl. For the small projects we are doing, every website will let that slip. Even if websites say, don't crawl us, if we're doing a very small thing, nobody will care. But usually how to go there is you go to whatever website you're going.com, and it's directly at /robots.txt. And if you really want to learn how to write a good robots.txt, then it's also at Wikipedia. So en.wikipedia.org/robots.txt. They wrote a huge prose about misbehaving robots and well-behaving robots and who is allowed and who is not allowed to go on their website. So this just to close the link to what we were discussing yesterday when you want to scrape websites for training data, for example.
Yeah, it's also like a pretty gray legal area. Because sometimes you are scraping data that is publicly available, but you're not allowed to use the data that is there, right? So for example, a public GitHub repository, if you're able to get the code there, put it in your code, does not mean you're allowed to run this code on your server, right? So just keep track of that. It's nice to use it for fun, for applications, but whenever you're using this for a real commercial product, make sure you're allowed to. You don't want to be sued, right? Being legal and being sued are two different things. So yeah. You'll see here that we're using Beautiful Soup. Now, here is another variable that it was in response. It's called content. And this is all of the content that we receive. And we tell it to use an HTML parser because we know that the content is HTML. And then we get the soup. And then here is a loop that goes over all of the paragraphs. And here you'll find that I said find all P. Now, I'm not sure if any of you is aware of HTML and how it works, but HTML has a bunch of tags. So for example, there are header tags, link tags, and paragraph tags, which is denoted by P. And here we are trying to get all of the paragraph tags. And basically, I'm just compiling all of that into one big text string, and then we're going to print it. And hopefully, it should work. Now, you will either get a response like this, or you will get an error or an empty string. This just depends on the website you're going, whether it allows you to, and whether what you see on the URL is actually what you get back through the API, and it's different from places to the others.
Why
Yeah.
do we need a loop for
Right. So the way it works is that it does not give you the entire string. It gives you a list of paragraphs. So for example, like I said, the HTML has a list of tags, right? Whenever you're working with a website, you have paragraphs in different locations, and they're in different tags. So this works by receiving every tag and put it to you as an element. So if you want the entire string, you have to just concatenate them together.
And you create the list only in the loop itself. So in soup.findAll creates the list. So the findAll function of soup basically gives you the list of all p's, and then you iterate through this paragraph. So basically here you create your own problem, and here you solve your own problem directly.
Yeah. So for example, we can, this is the nice thing about Colab, that I can just paste, I guess I wouldn't be pasting, .find all, and then we say p, and then we print, and you will see that it returns all of the tags. So here is like the beginning of the tag is -p, I'm not sure if you can see it properly, and the end of it is always /p.
And for Python, the relevant is the comma after the
Yeah.
closing p.
Yeah. So now these are a bunch of objects. You can see them as strings, but they also have the tag beforehand. Now, if you're using this text for later, you want to be able to put them all in one string, but you also want to remove all the tags. So this is why we have the extra step here of saying get text for every element. Now, what you can also do is there's a great Pythonic line without a loop, because Python is amazing, where you can say string dot join, and then you say soup dot find all p, which might break, but we'll see. Yeah. So you'll see here that the input of the list, you expect it to have a string, but you had is an object called tag. So this is why you cannot use it directly, and you need to take out of it the actual text content. Again, in useful cases, it would be just nice to have a string output. However, whoever created the beautiful soup returned the entire tag as an object, which is useful to some people, but annoying to other people. This is what you have to deal with if you're using like a different package.
And we're doing two things here, because the website will probably, from the tag perspective, look something like this. We have a heading, which has the thing on the website. Then we have the first paragraph writing something. Then we might have a list with some content and another paragraph, and of course a lot of other things. So the first thing is we ignore everything that is not a paragraph, and then we are only taking the things what's written inside the paragraph tags.
Yeah.
So the get text is string per string, so it's each string.
Yeah. So the tag object has a function that is called getText that returns only the string.
But that's why we did it.
Yeah. And then we loop because we need the getText of every tag, and we need to append it to our string. Is this clear for everyone else? Okay. Now, this is all of the URL API calls that we're going to do on a public link. The next step is the cool one, where we're finally going to use the GPT OpenAI API. And there's a lot of information on how to get the keys to, well, use GPT. Do they have a key?
That's now in the presentation.
That's in the presentation. Okay.
That's in the presentation.
Right. So first of all, we're going to run the pip install OpenAI. This is the first code block after the text. And this is where I talked about that some packages are not inherently within your Python environment, and you have to install it. Colab allows us to do that by inserting a exclamation mark. And this tells it that whatever comes after the exclamation mark is a system call, not a Python call. So if you just run this, it should start installing stuff for you.
I will look at it in a second. I don't know exactly where it is right now.
And then, once it's finished installing, you come to this block code that needs an API key, your model, and then some max tokens. And this is where we need the key.
How long is the exercise still?
It's just one block of code or two blocks of code still.
One blocks of code. then maybe let's make the coffee break right now. Then I will
yeah,
find
and then we can
the
talk about
API
GPT
key.
right before LangChain. Yeah.
Exactly. So is there anything? So this, of course, was now not very AI related, but mostly Python related. But I think it's important for everything that will follow now. Is there questions to what we have? Did you get the general concept? And I have two more remarks. The one is that if, for those of you who have been in the low-code microclass, and if you remember Zapier or Make, or if you're using Zapier or Make, this is basically what these tools do. They basically have code written to call all different kinds of APIs. And while we already have this get function and the response function, the requests function, the requests module, Make and Python, Make and Zapier are basically just doing the same thing for you. So if we are asking for the weather, then we can either do it like we just did, call an API ourselves, try to work with the output, or go to Make, go to Zapier and say, you give me that now, you give me the weather right now. And it's also just calling the API, asking us for an API key and returning it in a kind of file, in a kind of format that we can work with. Okay, and the other thing I will talk about later. But then we are now at 10:50 and a little bit. So I would say let's try to refuel, re-energize, get a little bit up and move around. This was quite a lot, I think, in particular to those new to coding. Mm-hmm. We'll meet back at, let's say, 11:05. And in the meantime, I will find the OpenAI API key that we will work with today.